Hello, welcome to the Analyst Inside Cricket with me, Simon Hughes, and with Simon Mann back from sunning himself in Thailand. So tell me, did the disasters of England's T20 and the women's Ashes penetrate the sand on a Thai beach?
Well, I was following it inevitably because I can't keep away from cricket. I was watching it and following it and looking at the scores. I also had an incredible dream, Yoz. I mean, it's extraordinary. I was facing a leg spin bowler in a net and I whacked him for six over wide long on. And the leg spin bowler was none other than Donald Trump. He was rolling out his leg spin bowlers in that kind of roly-poly fashion. And then I hit it for six and I woke up. What an extraordinary dream to have when you're on holiday.
Sounds like a nightmare, actually. I mean, it really does. Imagine him emerging into your dream. Oh, God. He had very little contact with cricket, hasn't he, in his life, except that time he opened the stadium, the new stadium in Ahmedabad, and pronounced the world-famous Indian cricketer Sachin Tendulkar or something. I mean, it wasn't too bad, I suppose, but it was quite amusing. Anyway, are you feeling relaxed?
I am, yeah, but ready to crack on with plenty of cricket conversation because we haven't been together for about 3 weeks and an awful lot has happened and there's a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about what's been going on overseas with the various England teams and not least the England T20 team. We're also going to talk about the World Test Championship. We're going to talk about Afghanistan as well and the reaction to them participating in the Men's Champions Trophy, which is coming up, and England are playing them, and there have been calls for a boycott, but we're going to hear from the in-exile Afghani women's team who say they don't want a boycott of the men's team. But we're going to start, Yoz, with the 100, aren't we? Because an awful lot's gone on and a lot of money has been raised. But I've got some questions for you. I know you're kind of a big enthusiast for what's happened. I've been following you on social media when I've been away. You're a big enthusiast for what's happened and the amount of money that's been raised. So, well, just give us your general reaction to what's happened over the last week or so. Then,
well,
general reaction first.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna call this episode "How to Spend It," I think, aren't we? Because money has now materialised. Certainly, quite a lot of it anyway. We're talking at this present moment, £365 million has been pledged to the 100 franchises by various investors. I'm sure you've read the stories. There are still 3 franchises to be sold, so you can reckon on probably 500 million in the end is going to go to the county game. And just to explain what's happening there, that 500 million is 49% in most cases of the franchises, although the Manchester Originals have sold 70% in all. But the 49% that's been sold of each franchise, 90% of that money goes to the counties and the MCC. So if you add up, let's say it's going to be eventually 500 million that's been pledged, 50 million of that, 10% will go to the grassroots, which will be administered by the ECB. And then the rest, so round about 450 million, will be shared out equally amongst the 18 counties and MCC. So a bit of maths, that means potentially 23 million per county that they will get to use for their own devices to hopefully build a future for themselves. And in just one point about that 23 million, of course, it won't all come in one go, because if my experience is anything to go by in the way that a lot of these investors actually put their money forward, it comes out in dribs and drabs. It doesn't all come out at once. So I think it will be a gradual process of releasing this money. But to me, it's transformative for the game. And it's something that I've been writing about. In fact, somebody sent me a column I wrote in the Cricketer magazine in 2016, and the title of the magazine, the front cover said, beware the F word, or don't mention the F word, meaning franchise. And I wrote how this is potential, the sale of potential regional teams could transform and rejuvenate county cricket. And sure enough, 9 years later, it's happening.
Well, the money's there. But so here's a question for you then, Yoz. This is the question that's been in my mind. What does the county game do? Or how does it spend it? How does it invest the money? What does it spend it on? There's been a bit of talk, hasn't there? Jack Russell and Michael Vaughan have had a sort of to and fro about Mike saying, well, there's lots of money, it's sort of safeguarded the future. Jack Russell saying, well, you can only sell the crown jewels once, and once you've sold it off, what about 10 years down the line when all that money is spent? What happens then? So it's already well having all this money now, but how is it going to be spent, and how does it benefit the game? Not just in the short term, because you can clearly see how it would benefit the game in the short term, but what about in the mid-term as well, and perhaps way into the future? It's interesting, actually. Before this podcast, we were just talking about something we might move on to. We were talking about the fact that it's 20 years since the 2005 Ashes. That's caught everyone's imagination. You think, well, how has the game changed since 2005? Which is such a vivid memory, I think, for so many people. What's it going to be like in 20 years' time, in 2045? What's the future going to look like? Anyway, let's have a look at the counties first, and how are they going to spend the money, and what should they spend it on? What do they do with it to safeguard their futures, not just this year, next year, but decades into the future?
Well, I think that's a really important point, and obviously it will depend. Each county will have their own agendas. Some are in debt quite significantly, the likes of Lancashire, Warwickshire, for instance, who spend a lot of money on stadium redevelopment and still owe a lot of money to the people who paid for that, banks, etc. So the first thing that a Lancashire will probably do is pay off some of their debt, if not all of their debt. That's the first thing. I mean, of course, players and their agents will also be in for the money as well. But
that's the point, isn't it? That's the point, Yoz, is that that everyone knows there's that money around now, and it's a bit like Premier League football or professional football in the UK. That pushes the wages up, pushes the transfer fees up, and but there's an inexorable pot, it seems, of TV money for the Premier League, but probably not necessarily the case with the county game.
Well, I mean, let's come to that in a sec, but just to say, I hope that they implement a very strong salary cap on all counties, and I know there are ways of getting round the salary caps in the county system, as there have been in rugby and even in football, but hopefully they will see some sort of sense here, because I think we all need to realise how precarious the finances of all sport are, actually. Football is maybe a separate situation, but even a lot of football clubs aren't really doing all that well financially, are they? There's only a few.
No, they're not.
A lot of profit. So I think we all have to realise, and professional cricketers have to realise, that counties are on not so borrowed time, but finances are fragile, and running a county team is very expensive. So I think that we all have to accept, as ex-county pros or current pros, that you can't just get a huge scale up in your salary. But having said that, there is more money potentially available in the future. I don't buy the Jack Russell view that it's like selling the family it's like selling the family silver once and that's it. You've never got another chance, because in 4.5 years' time, there'll be another broadcast deal. And probably what will happen is that the 100 will be unbundled from the test match rights and other domestic rights and have its own separate rights, fee, cost, whatever, value. And that money, say they sell the 100 in 4 years' time to whichever broadcasters want to buy it for 500 million, 80% of that money goes to the counties. 20% is kept by the board for running everything, and the rest is shared out amongst owners and counties. So there is more money down the line, assuming that the 100 and other parts of that rights empire retain their value. Now, media rights have probably plateaued a bit after about a 10-year period when they really soared. The media rights of sport have sort of stabilised, I would say, slightly going up. It's still projected to rise a tiny bit, but not perhaps to the extent that the ECB promised in their portfolio at the start. So, but what I'm saying is there is money in the future. It isn't just like selling the family silver from a one-off position. So, yes, there is going to be this money.
For that to happen, though, Yoz, for that to happen, you're going to have a really successful 100 product, aren't you?
Correct.
One that captures the imagination, one that isn't just rather desultory. It has the best players, possibly even becomes the second best franchise in the world behind the IPL. It's hard to see how the IPL can be dislodged, can be knocked off the perch. especially with the amount of talent in Indian cricket, which we've seen in the last week or two, and the crowds and enthusiasm for the game, and also the audience for the game in India. It's going to be very difficult to rival that. So the product has to be good, doesn't it? It has to be really top notch.
The key to it. So I've broken down the assets of each county, if you like, into three. So they've got the stadiums, the grounds.
Is it the counties or the 100 franchises we're talking about?
No, this is obviously the money is going to the counties, right? All the money is, when I say all the money, the bidding is for the franchises, but the money is pooled and shared out amongst the 19 counties, including MCC, right? So each county will get 23 million, roughly, give or take, okay? So that then means they invest in their own futures. So how do they do that? Well, firstly, I think they have to look at the stadiums. That's one of their assets. Secondly, they look at the product, which is essentially the team. And then thirdly, matches and all that content that you can generate as a result of having a team. So those are the three assets they have. Now, I've based, my kind of plan on something called the virtuous cycle of building franchise value, which is a diagram that I put into the book I wrote with Manoj Kodali of the Rajasthan Royals called A New Innings. And I'm also going to put this graphic in a blog, which I'm writing today on my Crickverse Substack blog. And basically, it's 6 circles which show how you can help the cycle of improvement and growth through sensible investment. And the starting point is investing in on-field performance. Before we come to that, I want to talk about stadiums a bit, because I think one of the fundamental problems that county cricket has, and that all sport has really, is that those stadiums are not in use for many days a year. They're not full of people for many days a year, especially county cricket grounds. So they have to find a way of making more use of that real estate. And how you do that, there are lots of ways. I mean, some counties are already doing it. They're obviously doing rock concerts and, events and so on. But I think it has to be a bit more inclusive and a bit more thorough than that. So one thing I would think about is trying to create maybe 5G outfields, which is a mixture of plastic and grass. So there's no effect on the play, but you can use them in the winter for, I don't know, school sports, football, hockey, whatever. In the same way as they do in Australia, where you've got multi-purpose venues, so Australian rules in the winter and cricket in the summer. That means those stadiums are being used more often, and also within that idea, also creating more facilities around the space of the ground itself, which can be used all around the year. So I'm thinking things like a gym, a really good gym, which people can be members of and attend every day. Maybe something like a sixes installation, the virtual cricket in nets. Things gives people something else to do and another reason to be at that ground off season or away from matches. So I think we have to be quite creative.
Hotels?
Yeah, hotels, exactly. And some counties have already done this. Better hospitality facilities. So you have a restaurant in the winter which looks out over the ground and people meet up for lunch and so on. Coffee bars, whatever. I mean, I think we have to be a little bit more creative without going to the lengths of putting a roof on a stadium. I think we have to be more creative about how we make use of that real estate outside match days.
Okay, so you've got these other circles, virtuous circles.
So that's the sort of in a way that's infrastructure. That's kind of hardware, I suppose. But the circles really bring me to the team. Now, the team is, to use a phrase from our content, to use a phrase from our book, A New Innings, the team is a content factory. Teams now are content factories. And what I mean by that is you create lots of content out of them, not just the match performances and so on, but also the other kind of content, individual clips of players' lives, behind the scenes, documentaries, all sorts of other things, masterclasses, all sorts of things you could do with players to keep them engaged with their audience. But that sort of jumps ahead a bit. Firstly, using the money to invest in on-field performance. So buying in some better players, developing your young players with more sophisticated training systems, having better pathways through. So you're developing players all the time. You immerse your pros in state schools and try and make more state schools come to the county ground to experience cricket in whatever form you can create. So there's more interaction between the community led by the professionals that you've hired yourself, but investing in on-field performance, investing in high quality players as well. I mean, Middlesex last year couldn't afford an overseas player, because their money situation was so bad. So, you've got to invest in on-field performance. And leading on to that, I mean, this sounds all a bit sort of theoretical, build a clear and distinctive brand. That just means, playing in an enterprising way, having interesting characters in your team and developing those characters. I mean, there'll be a lot of characters in these teams already which haven't perhaps had the amplification of creativity to make them seem more interesting. You've got to engage people more with teams, and that requires imaginative content and imaginative creativity to enhance their reputations and their images.
And we're not, let's be clear, you're not just talking about the 100 teams, you're actually talking about the county teams as well.
I'm talking about the county teams. They are getting the money, right? They're getting the money. So, it's that they're getting most of the money from these sales. So it's up to them now to find, clever ways, creative, imaginative ways of sustaining their presence. I mean, at the moment, so if you look at a county on average, counties' turnover in this country around about 6 million. Obviously, varies. Some counties, Lancashire, Surrey, spend a lot more and turn over a lot more. But in the main, most counties would turn over about 6 million and will have negligible profit, if any. So Middlesex last year, 130,000 profit. Other counties made a loss, Gloucestershire, people like that. So, they're in a precarious hand-to-mouth sort of existence with this £6 million turnover. Now they're going to get, 20 million to invest in the future and make them sustainable for the future. So, by building that clear and distinctive brand, which sounds, it sounds all very sort of trendy, but what it means is being compelling, playing good cricket with some interesting players, some overseas players. I mean, somebody on our World's Best Cricket Club, our virtual club, said, hire people like Steve Smith. Well, that causes interest. I mean, when he came and played for Sussex, I mean, some people were up in arms. Why is he getting ready for the Ashes by playing 3 games for Sussex? But it interested people in the local community. They came and watched him. It helped the players he was playing alongside. It just raised the profile generally. So you have to do that. And by doing that, you then get more engagement with people. And, county cricket is not followed very closely by people in the ground, but it is followed peripherally by a lot of people who are not in the ground. And so serving them better by better content, better streaming, highlights, clips at lunchtime, highlights of individual innings or individual bowling spells, great catches, all that kind of stuff can be poured out onto different platforms. That builds more of an emotional connection with the team and individual players, which then creates engagement, right? And then people start spending money. And, the fundamental key to this in the end, and it's that dirty word, data, which is the new oil. But think of counties like Amazon. When you buy something on Amazon, it immediately sells you or suggests you buying about 10 other things which are related to the thing you just bought. Well, that's what counties need to do with their fans, is be able to work out through algorithms and so on what their customers, their spectators, their fans' preferences are, and ultimately sell them other things, engage them more in the whole merchandise process. That then drives new multiple streams of revenue. You grow the fan base, you invest in players, and you're back to the start again. So that's the cycle that the counties need to get involved with. And, it starts with, I think, improving the facilities around the stadium itself, which shouldn't cost that much, but just needs a bit of thought, and investing in the playing strength. And that means working on the grassroots, working with schools, buying in star players, etc.
I mean, one thought I had there where you were talking about investing in facilities. I mean, Gloucestershire, for example, they talked about moving, didn't they? So is this the funding that could take them to a new stadium in north of the city and a spanking new stadium which could hold bigger events? And like you say, or like those events you're talking about, not just cricket events, but also events all year round.
Yeah, but I think more than that also, I think counties need to think of themselves as media operations, really. And if I sort of...
What does that mean, Niels? What does that mean?
It means good commentary, digital experts sending out clips all the time and making the most of your players and your team and their performances and their stories, right? So if I give you 3 examples of the sort of state of play in, say, commentary boxes at the moment, there's one county, the commentators are commentating on the stream and they don't even have a monitor, so they don't know when there's a replay. Another county have their commentators high up in a hotel out of the way, and you can't, so they have no engagement with the director who's cutting the pictures, and the director has to keep completely quiet because he's sitting in the same room as the scorer who likes total silence. So there's no interaction between the director and the commentators. And another county, for example, have a man stood on the roof, a student, filming with a cheap camera, trying to pick up the ball. Well, it just looks all like 1960s. It's terrible. So simple improvements of that kind of thing, which I've been working on myself with a couple of counties, can really help to just sharpen the image of the game, make it look more exciting and attract more people to watch it. And by the way, also, if we should just mention one other thing while we're talking about this, women's cricket. Now, there's been a survey recently done by... Nielsen, and it's called the Sport Industry Report. And they've looked at all sorts of areas of sport, and they have calculated that the value of women's sport in the next 10 years is going to increase by 37% per year. Well, that incredible rise of media value and interest is something that all counties must tap into by engaging more women, by giving opportunities to girls, by creating more pathways. And, we're still, almost neglecting half of the population because we're not really generating enough interest in women's cricket. I mean, we started, and the 100 has obviously helped that, but we need to do much more. And going back to my point about, the digital opportunity, part of this sports industry report says a survey found that 59% of fans want data, stats and insight pre, during and after a match. 47% are consuming fewer full games, preferring short-form clips and highlights. So we have to be cognizant of that. People haven't got the time to watch a whole 4-day game, but there are so many interesting stories and highlights moments that are generated. We've got to do a lot more with those to get more people interested.
Yeah. What does the 100 look like, Niels? I mean, has the 100 been a good product so far? I mean, has it sort of captured the imagination? I mean, there's still that grumbling, isn't there? People, traditionalists hate it, and yet the crowds are pretty good, aren't they? When the 100 is on, it's got its right flap in one of the big months of the year in August, and it presumably it's going to stay there, which means that the county game, which furnishes the 100 with players, and also the Test match arena and the international arena with players as well, is in that subservient position. And we've talked about this many times before. Potential for developing spin bowlers. If you want to go and win in India, say, is diminished if you're not playing at, say, the driest time of the year. The arguments are there. What about the 100? What is it going to be? How do you quantify success? I couldn't help just be my attention being drawn by a tweet which I saw this morning, or a communication on X from, I don't know Freya Woods, but it just caught my attention. It said T20 is not saving cricket, it's destroying cricket. Okay, well, you can debate that, whatever. Cricket will eat itself. It'll just be franchise leagues for money until viewers switch off from overload. And I think that's actually possibly the key part of the sentence there. Until viewers switch off from overload, and then it will be dead. Dead. Batters can't bat anymore. They only slog sweep and slog sweep. And what I'm thinking of is, this has kind of gone on the whole time, hasn't it? Well, certainly in the game in the UK. We had, in the 60s, game was dull, wasn't it? John Player League, and it captured the imagination. You played in it. It was exciting. People switched on and watched it on BBC Two, but then it died eventually, didn't it? And it people sort of seemed to lose interest in it. And then we went from 40 over cricket to 20 over cricket. And now there's so much 20 over cricket that even you were saying with the England-India series that you couldn't really engage with it because there's just so much of it. So, where are we with it? Cricket's got all this money, but actually, is there going to be that sort of that real appointment of view? Because it might just be, it's just another game. It's another game of people whacking the ball out of the park, and it hasn't got enough nuance, etc.
Well, I think the advantage the 100 has got is that it's short. It's, when I mean short, I know the games are short, but so is the tournament. And it's short and condensed and intense. And, then it doesn't come again for another 10 months, 11 months, same as the IPL. The IPL.
So it is a bit special. It has a special value. Yeah.
I mean, I think you have to think of the 100 as the entertainment arm of cricket. It's almost like a circus, really. It's sort of exhibiting all the wares in, sort of glitzy ways. It's not necessarily it's certainly not the purest version of the game. But it is cricket. It is a ball and a bat, and if you're out, you're out, and all that. And one team has got to score more runs than the other team. So it is cricket. People don't like its garishness, but it's attracted new audiences. And what the investors in these franchises have bought into is the idea of an event that captures the interest and gets talked about a lot and actually has a buzz about it. And it's on TV, obviously, and people. It's quite easy to follow. There's only 8 teams. One of the other things that the investors really like about it is there's no relegation or promotion. So in the same way as the IPL, there's no danger of you suddenly going into the second division and disappearing without trace, as often happens with football clubs. So there's a security about it and a consistency about it. And it is not everybody's cup of tea, clearly, but it has created this vehicle for investment that will support the rest of the game. Yeah. Well, it's also done a lot of good for women's cricket as well. I mean, the women who obviously played disastrously in Australia have still commended the fact that the 100 raised the standard. And unfortunately, it's only that 3 weeks of the 100 that does raise the standard in women's cricket. And the rest of the time, county cricket isn't all that good in this country at women's level. So they haven't been able to sort of benefit from the injection of quality that the 100 provides.
Mm. So we talk about 20 years back and 20 years in the future. So in an ideal world, in 20 years' time, the counties will be thriving because they've invested the money well. And also on the 31st of July every year, people will be going, great, fantastic. The 100 is starting tomorrow or next week. Is that's an ideal world, is it? Where people go, right, 3 weeks of fantastic, exhilarating cricket in the same way now that people, professional football has been going for what are we? I don't know, 140 years, something like that. That when the new season comes around, when it's early August, football fans they're looking forward to it, aren't they? They are anticipating the new season. They've had 2 or 3 months off from football, their own club football anyway. And they are really looking forward to it. And of course, you lose the first couple of games and you go, oh, God, this is a long season. We've got another 9 months of this.
Well, I mean, there's two things to say about that. I mean, one is that football has had a much longer history and there's a sort of tribal allegiance to...
Has it, though? Has it? Yeah. Well, I mean, cricket's been going...
since... the teams have been... But compared to the 100...
Oh, I see. Right.
The 100, the football clubs have been in existence a long time. So they've got tribal followings, which obviously the 100 hasn't yet got.
And they've got history as well, haven't they?
But the one similarity with the two is that both are attempting to bring in the best players in the world. And that's what you salivate over, isn't it? Is the opportunity to watch the greatest footballers in the world on the same football field, the Man City against your club or whatever, And the same applies to the 100. In the future, because there's more money now being pledged, therefore they'll be able to buy in some higher value players, and it will be ideally the second best cricket tournament in the world after the IPL. And that will definitely raise the value and the profile.
Yeah. So is this a real watershed moment for the game in the UK? Or...
I think it's transformative. I think it's seismic. I think these counties are suddenly going to get a windfall of money. And you're quite right. It all depends how wisely and shrewdly they spend it. But it's transformative for every county, even the ones that are rich, like Surrey or Lancashire, who are in debt, by the way. It is totally transformative, assuming they spend it wisely.
Yeah. We'll move on to talk about all sorts of other things in just a moment. But actually, Surrey are an interesting phenomenon, actually. I mean, they've got this ground at the Oval where, you turn up, during COVID, we had to do matches from the Oval remotely, say IPL comments and things like that. And you turn up on a Sunday, and then you hear singing from the local church that hires the venue out every week. And they obviously have to take a bit of time off when cricket's played there. Although, the county matches are sometimes going on, then you hear the singing from the church on a Sunday morning. And then all sorts of conferences are going on. It's a real buzz, actually, around the Oval.
Well, that's the key. I mean,
that's the key, isn't it?
County has to become the sort of centre of their community.
Yeah. It's probably a bit easier in London, do you think, where it's very accessible, somewhere like the Oval, and you've got a big population as well?
Maybe, but I mean, there's lots of county grounds which are fairly central to their cities or their towns. And I think we should look at the model of French rugby, actually, because if you go to a French rugby town, when there's a match on, the whole place is buzzing with rugby talk. And the local players are, local celebrities. They're heroes of that town or that city. And we haven't managed to achieve that with county cricket, partly because cricket's behind a paywall. It's been lost from terrestrial TV for 20 years. And therefore, it's not in the sort of public consciousness. It's not sort of something that people watch every day automatically and know about. It's not taught in schools either. And that's another area that counties can help with, is to engage more with state schools, get more interest, more support, and as a result, more sustainability. So all that discussion there is pre-seed in my blog, The Crickverse, on Substack, if you want to have a look at that, and we'll sort of help you understand the stuff we've been talking about there. Right, we're going to change tack now. We're going to talk about England in India and perhaps the future of Test cricket. But first, we should just talk a little bit about our sister podcast, Storylines, who yesterday conducted a really fascinating interview with three girls from the Afghanistan women's team, now exiled in Australia, Faruza Amiri, Nahida Sapan and Benifasha Hashimi. And they just talked about the struggles they'd had to try and keep engaged with the game, the dangers they embraced in trying to escape from Afghanistan through numerous checkpoints with the Taliban military sort of standing over them, hovering over them, checking their papers and trying to understand why they were moving on from their homes. I mean, they took huge risks and finally made it to Australia, where they were welcomed by Cricket Australia. And, they've actually played a match now as well, which is brilliant. And so one of the questions that Nikki Chowdhury asked the girls was, what do they feel about the idea of the England men's team or any other men's team boycotting the Afghanistan men's team in the Champions Trophy coming up in Pakistan? And it was Faruza who answered this question.
So I think, for me personally, we all have different but for me, I think making a problem cannot fix another problem, because where all the teams are, men's and women's, Afghanistan men's and women's team are, they've all tried very hard to be where they are today. So in this situation, I think boycotting is not a solution, but talking more about on the ICC. I think it all comes to ICC. For us, it's important that ICC recognizes us as a team. It's just still, I think ICC is still sending the funds from like the women's part fund back in Afghanistan. And they know that there is no women's team in Afghanistan, and we are living in Australia. So what we are asking for ICC, we want the support. We want the fund that they are keep sending to Afghanistan. We want to have that fund in Australia to play under the Afghanistan name. As I said earlier, that match was all about to represent Afghanistan and represent millions of women, and they are denied for their rights. So for us, it's important that ICC recognize us as a team and let us to play and compete in the international stage with the national teams. So we want the equal opportunity as men. We want to have the right to represent Afghanistan as men's doing. We want to have the same opportunity as other nations as well. We deserve the same opportunity as Australian women's team, as Indian women's team. We've been trying so hard back in Afghanistan to represent Afghanistan. We left everything. We lost our home, our identity, everything behind just because we want to play cricket, and left everything behind to come to Australia to play cricket and represent our country. And also in that, touch on that what other nations can do, support us. We just released our fundraising platform, which is Pitch Our Future. So if anybody is hearing my voice, so please help us, please support us to continue playing cricket and, give that hopes for millions of people in Afghanistan that they are denied for their rights, as I said earlier. So if you want to support us, our platform is Pitch Our Future, so you can support that. Not only us, but other Afghan women, we can support them as well.
It's an incredibly uplifting story, actually, the efforts that they've put in, and they are supported now by Cricket Australia. Also, interestingly, they are the first recipients of money from the Global Refugee Cricket Fund from the MCC as well. And you can donate to that, actually. I'll put the link on the show notes of this podcast. So there are various ways of donating and supporting an incredible cause. And it's interesting, isn't it, that they don't want to see a boycott. They just want support and recognition from the ICC.
Yeah, it sounds to me, they want the ICC to recognise them as the official Afghanistan women's team, which of course not competing, and that's what the whole complaint has been about. Well, it's part of the complaint as well. Also, it's about competing against a country where women are totally discriminated against. I mean, that's seen as one of the big issues as well. And there's been a comparison with apartheid South Africa and how there was no sport played with South Africa for many, many years, and eventually South Africa got rid of apartheid, and then normal sporting relations resumed. So that's part of it as well. The issue I can see there is about, okay, it's fine for now, isn't it? Recognising the Afghanistan women's team as this team in exile, but where do the players come gradually for the future? You've probably got quite a small band of players. Where do you get the next generation of players from? So it's kind of okay in the short term, but where does it go in the long term? I suppose what you could, the ideal, and this is probably incredibly idealistic, is the team plays, is successful, is very much, it's in everyone's focus, and the authorities in Afghanistan relent and allow women to play cricket, and there's change in the country. But I mean, that seems from this distance to be pretty idealistic sort of thought.
I mean, maybe a way of doing it would be for the ICC to put money into an academy specifically for Afghanistan female players in Japan, which is where obviously ICC are based. And they. But
where do you get the players? Where do you get the players from? Would they be allowed to leave the country? And have they played at all that allows them to to just have any sort of athletic background at all? I mean, that's part of the problem, isn't it? I mean, it's a really difficult situation that the female population of Afghanistan finds itself in. It's almost impossible.
Yeah, it is impossible. Anyway, these girls have managed to make a success of it so far, and you can hear the rest of that interview, which is a really good interview, actually, if you go to our sister podcast, Storylines, which is out now.
Should we talk about England?
Yes. Well, do we have to?
Listen, I had a look back at one thing we're constantly told, aren't we? I think is this feeling that there's a huge amount of talent in the English game. What white ball talent England have, and you think on the face of it, well, yes, they do, but their record as a team, both in 50 over cricket and 20 over cricket, has been pretty miserable for quite a long time now. Since the 2019 World Cup win, so what we're talking about, over 5 years now, they've won 29 and lost 29. So for one of the sort of major cricketing playing nations of the world, to have a 50% win record with the supposed talent they have, it's not really quite good enough. And then in T20 cricket, since they won the World Cup in Melbourne against Pakistan, they've won 15 and lost 17. So it's under 50%. I just couldn't help trying to compare that with India, who are phenomenally talented. I mean, England have gone out there. They won a game. They competed in 2 other games, and they lost one by 15 runs. They lost another by 2 wickets. So that they're not a million miles behind, but India are so strong. India, in their last 50, what have you got here?
57, isn't it?
Yeah. India in their last 57 games have won 44. Which is incredible in T20, isn't it? When you think it's it feels like such a nitro edge game. You expect a really good side to have a strong winning percentage, but up around you calculated it's up around 77%. I mean that's phenomenal, isn't it? And they showed their undoubted talent. They are obviously an extremely able side at home, and the IPL has actually produced so many talented players to play it, especially in Indian conditions. Of course, they did win the T20 World Cup in West Indies last summer as well. So yeah, although they went to Australia and were pretty ordinary actually in the Test matches, a sort of team in transition, 20 over cricket, they've changed it all around, and they're producing lots of top players.
Yeah, and they've got so much depth, haven't they, of talent? Someone who we've barely heard of, Abhishek Sharma, comes in and wallops 100 off about 35 balls. Amazing. I mean, they are a test team in transition. And if you look at the sort of track record of India over 20 years, their test team does go in phases where the old guard sort of gradually fade out. And then it takes a little while for the new players to come in and sort of rejuvenate it. But their T20 and white ball teams are much more consistent. They haven't lost a series at home for 16 series in white ball cricket, which is nearly double the next best. Australia from the 2000s won 9 series at home in a row, but the Indians have won 16. So it shows how powerful they are. And they've just got so many quality players. And I think, they've worked out from the experience of the IPL, they know how to play in those conditions. And, I mentioned Abhishek Sharma there. I mean, the way he bats, he's like a sort of modern day Chris Gale almost. Slightly different style of player, but tall, left-handed, just bunt sixes for fun. And he seems to have pioneered this shot off a good, fast, short of a length delivery on a round off stump, just outside off stump from people like Jofra Archer. He carves it over cover for 6. Just goes with the angle of the delivery, even if it's from round the wicket. He just gives himself a tiny bit of room and just throws his arms at the ball, and it flies off in the same way as someone like Travis Head does for Australia. Again, same kind of player, shorter in stature, but similar in method. And I think probably that's what I felt England have lacked, is left-hander. And, actually, this was mentioned about England's women's team as well, funnily enough. Got no left-handers, really, in the top 6. And England have got left-handers. They've got Duckett and they've got
Bethel.
But I think Duckett is not a power hitter. He's a more wristy player who is better against spin. Bethel's still, learning his game. He could become, a very, very prominent white ball cricketer, but at the moment, early days. And I just felt, the 2 star performers in that India team, really with the bat, were Abhishek Sharma and also Tilak Varma, another left-hander, who just plays the ball through the offside with kind of amazing hand speed and unerring consistency, really. So that's one area that England haven't really kind of sort of focused on enough, I don't think. And the other area that I think they could be better in, particularly, is more mystery spin, because it was Varun Chakravarti who really caused them problems in all those games. And white ball mystery spin is hard to pick because of the white ball, because of the floodlights. Seen a lot of examples of it.
Because of the smog.
Smog,
smog.
Adam Zampa, very successful for Australia in short formats for the same reasons. Bowls at the stumps, just varies his trajectory a little bit. And obviously England have got Rashid, who bowled, superbly in that T20 series, but they haven't got anyone else really. And Rashid bowls quite slowly, so you can get after him. He does take wickets, and he's a superb bowler. But I'm a bit disappointed they didn't give Rian Ahmed more of a chance in that T20 series, because they need to develop another mystery spinner, I think.
Well, I think it's fascinating watching it. I mean, England went with pace and India went with spin, didn't they? That was in terms of the bowling. England, all their nasty fast bowlers were all lined up, and India get through a couple of overs of pace and then bring on the spinners, bowl them inside the power play, and then suddenly the game sort of seemed to change round. And Chakravarti, I mean, that's a phenomenal series, isn't it? 14 wickets in a 5-match series, an economy rate of 7.66, and Jofra Archer going at 10.5 runs per over during the series. And the point being, I was saying, it's just another series. Does it really matter? Of course, years' time, T20 World Cup is in India and Sri Lanka. They have those every 2 years, so we're never far away from another tournament. And so there is a kind of a learning aspect to this for England, their seam attack and batting attack, and also their new coach as well, Brendan McCullum, with another tournament only a year away. And we see it in the IPL, don't you feel that different types of cricketers be successful, the batters and sometimes the seam bowlers as well have done well in the IPL, but you feel you do need at least a couple of decent spinners, to try and change the game in those middle overs, and just suddenly take 3 for 10 or something like that. It can drag you right back into the game. And England, they're lacking that. But then
they're lacking that. And the other thing I think they haven't got at the moment is a left arm bowler. And if you look at England's 2 T20 successes when they won the title, once in 2010, Ryan Sidebottom played a big role. And obviously when they won it in Australia, Sam Curran played a big role. He was man of the series, wasn't he? So I think they haven't got a left armour bowler. And Arshdeep Singh for India seems to be their number one pick in T20 to bowl left arm over, swings it, bowls good Yorkers at the death, bowls good slower balls. So, there are 3 sort of areas there that England could look at to improve. I mean, in the end, they're just not quite as good. They haven't got enough world-class players. Butler, exceptional, still exceptional. But, apart from him, I thought Bryden Carse emerged well in that series and looked good. Archer, obviously, potentially world-class, but blows a bit hot and cold. But they haven't got that many. At the moment, Harry Brook is still finding his way. He was out 5 times to leg spin. So, he's still going. I mean, he's potentially world class. And then
he struggled in India against spin, though, hasn't he?
Yeah, he struggled against. And of course, there's been calls for bringing Joe Root back as well, which I think are, almost, undoubtedly that will be the right way to go.
What, for a year's time in the T20 World Cup in India?
He's the best batsman, and what England have been guilty of, I think, is just trying to hit sixes all the time. And there are other ways of getting 10 and over, and Root has shown that. So I think he has to come back into the side as well to give them a bit more stability.
It's been quite a tough winter, actually, for England overseas. I think I'm not thinking not just of the men's team. I think of the women's team as well. They had awful time in Australia. The Lions went to Australia and then they lost the Test match by an innings against Australia A. Having said that, it was very much Australia's second team, whereas I think for the Lions it was a kind of experimental young team. Not totally, but I mean they were well beaten. England's Test team, they lost in Pakistan. It's not been you feel the results should be better for the amount of, when I come back to the cash again, for the amount of sort of interest, cash, whatever, the richness of the game in this country. There have been some quite slim pickings this winter.
I suppose really, the long and the short of it actually is that in India and Australia, they do get, and this is an argument I made about the women as well, they do get the pick of the athletes because cricket is such a prominent summer sport. The Indians and the Australians get the best athletes playing cricket more often, whereas in England, a lot of the best athletes go and play football or do something else. And you have to choose now. You can't, in the olden days when I played county cricket, you could play football in the winter as well. And there were people who played football and cricket professionally. You can't do that anymore. Football is a 12-month-a-year thing. Cricket's pretty much 12 months as well. And, you can't, I don't think you get quite the same quality of stellar athletes in cricket in England, partly because the game is still, behind a paywall and all that. It's not part of the national consciousness. But maybe, with the investment in the 100 and the investment in counties, that will change. I don't know. I would like to see a sort of platform for county cricket, like an OTT sort of TV channel or something, where all the county matches are available in one place and you can pick and choose and watch stars on the up and emerging players and so on. And it would become more of a conversation at the moment. It's not, and England are up against it with the strength of India and Australia.
Yeah. Perhaps that's what, kind of like John Lewis and his comments about making that walk from like Coogee to Bondi Beach was kind of what he was trying to say, but he probably kind of drew the wrong conclusion because there are people, the UK is an amazing sporting country. And in terms of success as well, if you strip it down, the World Cup victories in various sports and Olympic Games, yeah. But I think it's the allocation of the athletes is probably the key, isn't it? Having said that, I must say last week when I was in the warmth of Southeast Asia, I did find it much easier to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning and go for a cycle or a swim or whatever. Whereas this morning, last 2 days in the cold February, when I woke up, I thought about going to the gym, and I thought, oh no, I can't be bothered. I go down and have my breakfast instead.
I'll have a bacon sarnie instead.
Because actually, that warmer weather, it does sort of, I don't know, it does seem to grab you and get you out of bed. But look, you go through the parks in London, whatever. People are running, everyone's out exercising. It just feels a bit harder, isn't it? Because the weather's a bit tougher. But perhaps that makes you a bit tougher. I don't know.
Well, I think sun on your back always helps, doesn't it? I
feels like it, but
I just think that overall, it breeds the Australian climate. Breeds better athletes, and better athletes play better sport, and there's more to choose from than we have. I think overall, there's not much in it. We've shown we can beat Australia. It just doesn't happen very often.
We talked a lot today, Yoz. There's another one-day series starting in a couple of days' time. England against India, 3-match series. Nagpur, Cuttack, and Ahmedabad. And there is relevance because that leads into the Champions Trophy, which is coming up starting on the 19th of February. They've just about got their stadiums together in Pakistan in time. England's first match against Australia in that completely revamped stadium in Lahore. The last time actually I was in Lahore was the 1996 World Cup final when Sri Lanka took down Australia, and one felt at the time like one of the cricket's biggest ever upsets. And actually, one of the things I remember most about that final, obviously Sri Lanka winning, was the dew factor and how important that was in helping Sri Lanka. That actually batting second was such a massive advantage. I wonder what it's going to be like in Lahore, where all the games are going to be sort of skewed towards the side batting second, or all the games in Pakistan skewed towards the side batting second. I hope not, because it makes it a bit predictable, doesn't it? But anyway, the Champions Trophy is nearly with us. I'm heading out to Pakistan for that. My first game is that England against Australia match. England need to click into gear, don't they, in one-day cricket?
They do. After all we've said, they'll probably win that series 3-0 against India and win the Champions Trophy, and all will be right with the world again. So we'll see what happens anyway. Just to remind you that the Crickverse Substack blog is up later today, so check that out if you go to substack.com. And also that Storylines podcast as well is really worth a listen. And we'll be back later in the week for more cricket conversation and to look back at England's first 50-over match against India.
Thanks for listening. Goodbye for now.